Now, boys and girls, what happens if you sexually frustrate a cob swan to the point where it would actually shag a turnip with or without a feather on it, and then at the last minute, before it explodes, you offer it up the rear end of an unsuspecting goose? Guess what happens? Now, this all happened in 1910 in a place called Beeston, which is right next door to the Runtons where we visited in the last episode. It lived for about 15 years, and then in the end they killed it because it actually kept attacking humans. And I am not bloody surprised. So what twerp come up with this bright idea all those years ago? Is it me? Is it really me? The big question that threw itself out in my mind was why? And then, whatever next? Were they going to cross a pig with a hamster and call it a ham? If, as a teenager, you suddenly find out that your father is a horse, wouldn't you too have issues? Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner that I love Norfolk so. Well, in episode 5, I left you standing on the top of Beeston Bump. Now we're going back there today. We're going to come off the bump and walk down into the town of Sheringham. Only we're not going into the town, we're going to the promenade. Now, you all know the difference between a promenade and an esplanade, don't you? A promenade and esplanade. Well, in this episode, if you don't know, I'm going to show you the differences. Now, I almost forgot to tell you about my next door neighbour. He was into this sort of crossbreeding thing once upon a time. He crossed a wood pigeon with a woodpecker. Not only would it deliver your message, but it'd knock on the door as well. So, Solly Rubinstein is walking across the desert. Now you can flatten all your feathers down again because this is not a racist joke, okay? So Solly Rubinstein is walking across the desert when he trips on a bottle half hidden in the sand. So he bends down, picks up the bottle, rubs it off, and sure enough, out comes a genie. So the genie says, "Yes, Solly," he said, "you granted one wish only. What will it be?" So Solly picks up a little stick and gets down into the sand and he starts to draw a map. He said, "Right, genie, this is Egypt, this is Syria, this is Sudan, this is Israel," and he drew out a complete map of the Middle East. And he says to the genie, "What I want, my wish, is that this becomes one nation under God." And the genie is horrified. He says, "Solly, you're talking thousands of years of differing histories, thousands of years of different cultures, thousands of years of different languages. It's absolutely impossible." He said, "You'll have to think again." So Solly says, "All right then." He said, "If I can't have one nation under God, I want my wife to carry out oral sex on me." And the genie gets down to his knees, picks up the stick and says, "Let's have another look at that map of yours, Solly." Now, a few years ago, the local authority decided to go on to a cost-cutting exercise. And the idea that they came up with was to sell all the public toilets. Yeah, is it me? Well, anyway, this was one of the public toilets that you're looking at on the left-hand side. And they converted it, well, somebody did, into a house. And I think it's called the Wee House. Now, you remember how old I am. And I am making my way down these sea-soaked steps very carefully indeed. Now, Davy, don't you be doing anything stupid on the day before Christmas now, will you? No, I don't want to be calling any bloody ambulances, do I? While we're on the subject though, I saw something really funny the other day. To me it was funny, might not be to you. But on the side of an emergency ambulance it said, "Enroll with us." Well, that's fair enough, I thought, that's fair enough, looking for staff and crew. But it's what it said underneath it. A real is it me moment. And that was, "Full training will be given." Is it me? I will bloody well think so. I don't want any half-trained ambulancemen. I want a full man with about 10 years experience, don't you? But then I thought, is advertising really necessary? I mean, Anybody that's going to enter into a career which involves a lot of bodily fluids and seeing sights that the rest of us don't want to see, I think they would have already thought about that at an early age, wouldn't you? I mean, do they really need to be asked? I don't think so. I think anybody that's special like that is going to enter that profession as early as they can. Even more worrying is the simple fact that as they're actually advertising, they must be short of staff. That's a bit worrying, isn't it? So my advice to you boys and girls is to avoid anything dangerous, like cooking or bathing or driving a car or whatever. In fact, don't do anything. That leads me nicely into this episode's health tip. Now, if you've got rotten feet of any description, like athlete's foot or ingrown toenail or infections or whatever, all you need to do is put on a pair of clean socks and leave them on until they fall off. Yes, that's right, until they rot and fall off. You'll have no more foot troubles. That's a good tip, that is. So, a little bit on 60s and 70s television, which is on the same subject about healthcare. And that was, we used to have programmes back in the day like Emergency Ward 10 and Dr. Kildare. And these showed you graphically what the hospitals were like back in the 60s and 70s, with matrons and crisp little uniforms and so on. As I understand it, nowadays you're lucky if you get a bloody bed. They wheel you into a broom cupboard and leave you against the wall. A couple of weeks ago, I was chatting on to a nurse friend of mine, and she was telling me how several years ago this guy came into the hospital with a teacup stuck up his arsehole. Well, I nearly swallowed me cup of tea that I was drinking. I said, "You've got to be kidding me." She said, "No," she said, "you'd be surprised. The NHS spends $350,000 every year removing strange objects from men's arseholes." Is it me? So I said, "Tell me his name." And she went, "Why do you want to know his name?" I said, "I want to know if I've ever had a cup of tea round his fucking house." I mean, is it me? Apparently half the country are stucking things up their backsides, like onions, carrots, well, chair legs, would you believe? Bottles, all manner of items. There's a whole list of it. Unbelievable. So there's a YouTuber on there who's always asking questions of his viewers, so I'm asking you, are you one of these people sticking chair legs up your backside? And one bloke had to be rescued by the fire brigade because he got the corner post off of his bloody bed stuck up his arse. I mean, what do you say to the fire crew? I slipped? That's fair enough. But I'd love to have been a fly on the wall when the guy with a teacup stuck up his arse told the doctor how it came about. Since I heard that story, I've been looking at people strangely in the street and wondering to myself, I wonder what you're going to stick up your arse today. And then also supermarkets, I'm looking in people's trolleys and saying, oh, there's a Lloyd Grossman bottle, I wonder if that's going up her arsehole today. You see, the trouble is you can't unlearn these things. Once they've got into your brain, they tend to stay there. Now, the only thing that's been up my arsehole is my doctor's fingers and checking on your prostate all the time. The trouble is, these bloody doctors, they seem to take an unnatural healthy interest. Do you know what I mean? A strange interest in your backside. And while we're on the subject, who chooses to be a specialist arsehole doctor? I've wondered about this for years. You're going through this entire medical education and you choose arseholes? I can't believe that. I mean, think of all the body parts that you could specialise in. You know, ears, eyes, noses, breasts, anything. But arseholes. So I can't help but feel it must be some sort of booby prize. You know, baby, you only got 27 out of 100 in that final exam. The only thing left for you is arseholes. Sorry about that. Now, I have first-hand experience of a long stay in hospital. When I was 21, I broke my ankle in 4 separate places. It's called a Pott's fracture. And this is where I learned that you can actually get expelled from a hospital if you break the rules. Me? I went down the pub. Apparently, that's breaking the rules. Let me tell you, the food was absolutely atrocious. We used to get mates to go down to the Chinese or the fish and chip shop and get us food to bring in. It was a big article in the newspapers at the time where people were threatening to strike, would you believe, over the food. So I used to spend my days teaching the guy in the next bed swear words. He didn't actually speak a word of English. They've imported him to do some surgery on him. So I spent all day teaching him some really foul language that he can use when he wanted. I nearly got expelled over that. I spent over a year in hospital, but it did have its upsides. You have to remember I was a babe magnet, and the hospital is full of young, pretty nurses. And some of these nurses were dirty little buggers, let me tell you gents, dirty little buggers. I had 4 operations in all, trying to put what was left of my leg back together, and every time I came out of the operating theatre, I had dirty messages scribbled all around my private parts. The hospital took a very great interest in your bowel movements, and if for any reason you haven't been, they had 3 remedies. There was the little white pill, then there was the little pink pill, and then there was the enema. And let me tell you, if you had to have the enema, clear the ward. Orthopaedic wards didn't have sick people in them. They were all lorry drivers or footballers, people with broken bones. So in other words, they're all fairly healthy. And then the nurses would shout out, "Enema going in," and you would see 30 of these guys all diving under the covers. When they stopped me going down the pub, I had booze brought in. And the problem with that is, what do you do with the bottles? Well, I used to put them under the bed.
Morning.
The trouble was, the matron would come round periodically, and as she came up to tuck you in, she'd kick a load of bottles around. That's when the expulsion threat started again. I told her with as much honesty as I could muster, and my big baby blue eyes wide open, when I told her that the hospital was on a slight lean and the bottles weren't mine, they'd rolled down from that bed up in the corner, the old boy. This brings us nearly to the end of part 1 of the Sheringham Promenade walk. I shall be leaving the promenade in a minute, for part 2 anyway, and climbing up to the esplanade. Now that's a clue, isn't it, already? So I do hope you've enjoyed yourself here, and you've had a little giggle with me. I'll see you in the next bit. So, I get an awful lot of things, just walking up and down. See ya.